It's my great pleasure to introduce today's distinguished guest speaker, Brian Hart, the CEO of the Esselstyn Foundation. Brian is a multifaceted leader and a passionate educator dedicated to helping organizations develop programs that enhance problem-solving skills. His diverse background is nothing short of inspiring. Brian's journey began as an outward-bound instructor where he fostered resilience and leadership skills. His commitment to education led him to serve as a middle school principal, guiding young minds with his wisdom and vision. Additionally, his hands-on skills as a carpenter demonstrate his practical approach to problem solving and craftsmanship. Brian's dedication to health and wellness is equally impressive. As a certified plant-based chef, he advocates for the transformative benefits of whole food, plant-based WFPB nutrition. His expertise is backed by a Rouxbe Plant-Based Cooking Certificate, and his advocacy extends into his own personal life as an ultra-endurance athlete, having completed 4 Ironman triathlons. Academically, Brian holds a degree in history from Dickinson College and a master's in education from Ursuline College. His commitment to innovative education is further exemplified by his Montessori Adolescent Educators endorsement. Today, Brian will be addressing the topic that's close to his heart, getting the man you love off meat. I'm very interested in listening to this. I might learn some tips. He will share his unique insights and experiences, blending his educational expertise, culinary passion, and athletic discipline to provide practical advice and inspiration. Please join me in welcoming Brian, who's a truly remarkable individual, Mr. Brian Hart.
Wow, you made me sad. I'd like to meet the person you just described. That was such a nice introduction. I feel like I'm all pumped up now. Thank you so much, Peter. I really appreciate it. I apologize for the strange background. I'm in a hotel room. I'm actually doing an ultra marathon tomorrow. So plant-based nutrition can actually fuel long distance running. So I'm staying in a strange little hotel in northern Michigan, which is kind of central in the United States. So thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I'm really excited to talk about this. As you said, this is really a passion project for me. I'm not sure any of you have seen my a friend, John Fitzgerald, and I on YouTube have these videos that we put out occasionally called the Plant Bros. And it's really all about trying to get men to consider eating a lot more vegetables and fruit and whole grains versus the meat. And I'll get into all that during the presentation. So let me go ahead and see if I can share my screen. All right. It's working. It's always good when it works. All right. So again, we are the Esselstyn Foundation. For those of you who might be new to the call, we are what we call in the United States a 501c3, which is our tax code for saying we're a public charity. So we accept donations and are supported by donations to be able to do the work we do. We give away all of our programming free of charge to any partnering nonprofit organization, community organization, hospital, church, synagogue, mosque, anybody who's really willing to hear us talk about plant-based nutrition, we will do so. And we usually offer, as with you all, we offer a series of presentations with a variety of different topics, but I think where we really have gotten good is in the implementation of plant-based nutrition. And we can talk science all day, but once you kind of understand the basics of the science, it's really about how, and people often get overwhelmed by trying to transition to this lifestyle. And so that's where I think we're really good. And I thank you all for your interest and for inviting us in. And so if you're interested in learning more, just go to our website, www.esselstynfamilyfoundation.org, and you can learn more. And there's resources there. If you click on our resource page, we actually have an archive of all of our newsletters. We send out a newsletter once a week, and it's kind of like all the questions that anybody could ever ask about plant-based nutrition. We try to cover a new one each week. So if you go to our resources page, there's actually a really amazing resource for there, for all the questions like about calcium or about protein or about LP small a, or about how to steam your greens and, and all that stuff. So if you're interested in that, check that out. All right. So because I'm not sure who's on the call, I usually spend the first 10 minutes of any presentation. If it's a group that I'm not sure, how many people have been on the past calls, I'll just quickly review our 7 pillars of plant strong eating, because I think it's really important that, and you can hear it over and over again. I still learn new things, and I've heard Dr. Esselstyn speak probably 150 times or something. So I still learn something new. So a little bit of review here, and then we'll get into the whole men and meat issue, which is such a fascinating issue. All right, so here are our, let's dive into our pillars, just so everyone's clear. So what should you avoid? That's always the first question. What can I eat? Well, on our plan, our plant-based, we call it our Plant Strong plan, we want you to steer clear of meat, and I'll talk about why in a second, just a little bit of a review. Why? Meat, beef, poultry, fish, pork. If it has a mother, Dr. Esselstyn says you shouldn't be interested in it. And there's lots of different reasons. And if at the end, I'm happy to do questions for as long as people are interested in asking them. And so people often say, well, what about fish and all that stuff? And again, what we're trying to avoid is inflammation. We don't want the body to be inflamed. And anytime you're eating high amounts of meat, whether it's fish, poultry, pork, there's things in meat that will inflame the body. And we want to keep the body uninflamed. We want to keep the inflammation low, because inflammation manifests in lots of different ways. For some people, it might be heart disease. For some people, it might be autoimmune disease. For some people, it might be acne. For some people, it might be irritable bowel syndrome. But it's amazing when people go on a plant-based diet, it's just amazing. We get phone calls and emails all the time. Oh my gosh, my sore knee is not sore anymore, or my eczema has gone away ever since I quit eating these things. And so it's really amazing. Dairy products, number one source of saturated fat in the American diet is cheese. And it is mostly, it's very high in saturated fat. And not to mention it's connected to, as if you've followed any of the China study, with Dr. Colin Campbell, that we know dairy products are connected to cancer growth. Eggs, we don't like the whites or the yolk. High cholesterol levels. Extracted oils, and this is where Dr. Esselstyn gets criticized sometimes. People will say, well, what about the healthy fats? Remember, Dr. Esselstyn is used to working with people who are very, very ill. So these are people that have had multiple stents and bypasses, and he wants to keep saturated fat as low, if at all. He doesn't want saturated fat in the diet at all. And if they're eating, nuts and seeds, he even says avoid, or if you're using them, we're talking about crushing 3 walnuts on top of something if you want a little bit of that for your omega-3s. But again, extracted oils, they're packed full of empty calories, and they have been shown to damage endothelial function. Refined breads and sugars, we're steering clear of all the white pasta and the white breads, which have been stripped of all their great fiber. Refined sugars, we know sugar's not good for us. It's just concentrated calories, it's empty calories. And then lastly, but not leastly, high processed vegan meat substitutes. I'm sure as many of you have ever read the label on an Impossible Burger or a Beyond Meat burger. We love the idea of it for helping people transition towards away from meat, towards other alternatives. It's a stepping stone, but don't ever consider those plant-based meats as healthy. All right, so pillar number 1 of our program is eat plants. We love plants because you're going to get basically almost everything you need from plants. Think about where animals get it from. Cows and gorillas and rhinos get all of their the phytonutrients and antioxidants and vitamins and minerals and calories that they need from plants. We're just cutting out the middle creature and getting them directly from the plants. And again, not only are you getting almost everything you need, other than maybe B12 and D, you're also getting all these phytonutrients, antioxidants, fiber, and water, these things that we know are health promoting and can, in some cases, crush cancer cells. And so we're getting all the good stuff. A lot of times when people are transitioning to plant-based, they often talk about what they have to give up. And so we always try to remind people, well, think of all the amazing things you're getting. You're maximizing all the good stuff and getting rid of the problematic stuff. And you're going to avoid all the nasty stuff like the saturated fats and the trans fats and the growth hormones and antibiotics and concentrated pollutants and all the things that end up inflaming your body and giving you diseases. If there's one thing you take from tonight's presentation is the power of leafy greens. Please, please, please eat as many leafy greens as you can. We're talking about our kale and our collard and our beet greens, Swiss chard, all these amazing leafy, dark leafy greens are just so good for you. They are the nature's powerhouse vegetable. So eat them, even if you're going to keep eating meat. I don't want you to, but if you are, smother them with greens, if you will. All right. Pillar number 2 of our program is whole foods. We want to steer clear of processed foods. There's not really a diet on the planet that will tell you that to increase your consumption of processed foods. Basically, processed foods have been stripped of all their fiber and they've been pumped full of salt, sugar, and fat. We want to look for words when we're buying something that's got wheat in it. We want to look for words like rolled, whole, cracked, stone ground, and we want them to be 100% whole. And of course, we want you to embrace all these amazing whole grains that are out there that really has fueled human existence since the dawn of time. Brown rice and millet and quinoa and barley and polenta, all these amazing whole grains. Even popcorn is a whole grain. And so we also want you, Dr. Esselstyn is not a big fan of smoothies. This is because many of the people we work with are trying to lose weight. And remember, smoothies often contain, and I'll talk about this in a moment, they contain 500 to 800 calories of just all the stuff that's been ground up. So you're crushing all the fiber up. So you're speeding up the digestion process. You're blasting your system with all this fruit sugar. It's still sugar. It's just fruit version of it. And you're hammering your liver that has to process all that. And it's not going to fill you up. People who chug these smoothies are going to end up also eating other stuff. And so they don't realize they just took in 800 calories. Pillar number 3, we're going to watch out for calorie-dense foods. This really is the linchpin of this whole plant-based thing. There's a number of reasons why we love plant-based. One is all the good stuff you're going to get, the phytonutrients, the antioxidants, the fiber. Remember, at least in the United States, 95% of Americans are fiber deficient. It's $1 billion industry for people to take Metamucil and all these fiber additives and laxatives, when all they just need to do is eat whole grains and they'll poop like a champion. So all of the foods that are low in calorie density usually are full of fiber and water, and this is what will fill you up. And so this chart really, I think, nails it for me, and I love this chart, which came from from Jeff Novick. He's not a doctor, but he's a master's degree and a registered dietitian in the United States. If you've ever seen any of his videos on YouTube, they're excellent about label reading. He's really a master. And so look, if you see, if we eat low on the calorie density scale, so we're filling our bellies up with vegetables and fruit and potatoes and whole grains and tofu and beans and whole grain pasta, look, we're not taking in that many calories. We're actually, it'll be easy to be full and be full of all this good stuff and get the calories we need. Now, if we fill up our bellies on oil and butter and chips and cookies and sugar and dried fruit and bread, you're probably going to overeat. You're going to overeat by 500 calories. And if you overeat by 500 calories every single day, that results in, guess what? Obesity. So if you understand calorie density, you understand kind of the linchpin to losing weight on a plant-based diet. Pillar 4 is we're going to forget this protein thing. We're just going to stop talking about it. I can't tell you how many times. I just got a new job, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So I've got a whole new batch of coworkers. And when they find out I'm plant-based, I try to keep it kind of low key. I don't want to freak anybody out in the first few weeks of my job. And they start asking me, and of course, the first question every single time, well, don't you worry about protein? And of course, I don't. Most Americans, at least, I'm sure it's the same down under, which is that people are eating about twice the amount of protein that they should in a day on a plant-based diet. Jane and I, my wife and I, have tracked our protein intake, and just by eating a wide variety of plant-based foods, we are getting plenty of protein, just eating beans and nuts and broccoli and whole grains. And so this chart here really reminds people, women need about 46 grams a day, men need about 56. And you're going to easily get that if you're eating a wide variety of plant foods. Look at this, spinach even has 5 grams, black beans, 15 grams, a cup of black beans. So again, wide variety of plant foods, you're getting plenty of protein. Now, people often say, well, I'm a weightlifter, or I'm an endurance athlete, or I'm a big, competitive tennis player. I need protein. This is what my personal trainer told me this week at the gym. And so, we try not to be too snarky, but remember, your personal trainer, first of all, I don't know about in down under, but in the United States, personal trainers have to go through about a 6-week training program or something like that. These people don't know the science of nutrition. And they're often coming from a bodybuilding background, where if you're a competitive bodybuilder, yeah, sure, maybe you'll need a little extra protein to beef up, but and that usually should come in the form of plants, not in the form of meat. But this protein obsession is just ridiculous. Someone once compared it, I think it was Dr. Michael Greger once said that the idea that you need to eat extra protein to build muscle is sort of like the idea that you need to eat extra brains to be smart. Pillar number 5, we want you to eat your calories, not drink them. As I mentioned when I was talking about smoothies, most adults in the United States, at least, are taking in between 400 and 700 calories a day on liquids. And this is not filling them up. And so this chart reminds people, again, orange juice, if you're drinking orange juice for breakfast, a latte to wake up, a Coke with lunch, coffee to stay awake in the afternoon, lemonade with dinner, and white wine to relax at night, you're taking in almost half of your daily calories and not even realizing it. Daily calorie requirements. Pillar 6, we're watching out for the big 3, salt, sugar, and fat. As I'm sure you all know, we crave these things. It's because we do need them to survive, and our brains are wired. We're still working with 10,000-year-old brains in the realm of survival. And so we're driven towards these foods that used to keep us alive thousands of years ago, even up to like a few hundred years ago. And so we love these things. But of course, the food industry knows this. They pump all of our food full of salt, sugar, and fat. And this is why we end up with all these lifestyle-related diseases and struggling with obesity. We got to learn to read labels. Now, here's a great example. I'm going to give you a quick little tutorial on reading labels. It'll just take, 45 seconds. But the way we approach the salt, sugar, fat thing is this. If you pick up a product and you flip to the back, and I'm not sure if nutritional labels are a little different down there, but at least, this is what they generally look like up here. This is actually one of the older ones. They've got a new version. Here are our hard and fast rules, and hopefully this will help you, is that when I flip a Amy's is a big brand in the United States. It's supposed to be healthy. It's kind of like organic, a lot of organic fancy stuff. It's not cheap. And so people who think they're being healthy often pick up this stuff and think, oh, it's Amy's, so it must be healthy. Well, let's take a look here. If you look at the food label, look at total fat or calories from fat in a serving. So if a serving gives you 280 calories and the calories from fat is 80, that's actually quite a bit of fat. It's actually about 30% fat, and we want to keep our fat levels down around 20 or lower. So when we're doing that, we're just going to try to keep the fat calories in any product 20% or lower. And this one is closer to 30%. So it's a little higher. But this is the big one that's so interesting is you scroll down and look at sodium. Our rule for sodium is that look at calories. So if it's 280 calories a serving, we're looking for a 1-to-1 ratio between calories and sodium milligrams. So really, if there's 280 calories in a product, we don't want the sodium amount to be above 280. Well, look at that, 680 milligrams. That is a lot of salt. So right there, we know this is not a healthy product. And then sugar, we'll read the ingredients and look for the addition of anything that looks like a sugar. And that can be a lot of different things. It can be anything that ends in ose, O-S-E, sucrose, fructose, and often there is added sugar. So that's kind of our hard and fast rule. Last but not least, pillar 7 is to move your body. Anything you do with a movement is going to enhance your well-being. Not to mention anything you're doing with diet is going to be, it's sort of like you got to think of exercise as icing on the kale cake. But please don't make the mistake that so many people make. which is to think that they can out-exercise a bad diet. That kind of works when you're in your teens and early 20s. You can kind of get away with eating bad food and moving your body a lot. Your metabolism's high, you're young. But boy, once you're sort of past 25 and it doesn't work anymore, your metabolism starts to slow down. And people who are fit, who run marathons and stuff, end up with heart disease. And you can't out-exercise a bad diet. All right, we know that when we put people on this program in a week, because we've done it on a number of these health immersions that we're involved with, we see really pretty miraculous results even in just a week. So cholesterol dropping, LDL, the lethal cholesterol dropping, triglycerides dropping, your blood pressure dropping, weight dropping, 3 to 5 pounds. And it's also common for anybody taking any blood pressure or diabetes meds to have to reduce their dosages. All right. Let's jump into what we really are here to talk about, is getting the men we love off meat. This is kind of, again, as Peter said, it's kind of a passion project for me because probably like many of you, I have a lot of friends who think I'm insane. That as a, that being a man involves having to consume meat, and it's quite comical actually. But let's get into it here. So. First off, just a quick note on gender. I realize that gender really is a spectrum, and there's a lot of nuance to gender, but I want to make sure that really what we're talking about today is kind of what we might call traditionally or stereotypically male behavior. And I know that again, gender is a spectrum. People can be in all different places, but really ultimately this conversation is about trying to get people who are doubters to start to think a little bit more about their health and maybe some tricks to get them to maybe make healthier choices. So it applies to all humans, no matter their gender. But again, what we're looking at is what we might call traditionally male behavior. So let's discuss for a moment. So think for a moment, what memories do you all have of men in your life? And I'll pull up the, let's see, I'm going to pull up I was going to pull up the chat box so I can see your answers. All right, good, perfect. All right, I can see the chat now. So drop into the chat and tell me, what are some of your oldest memories of men and meat in your families growing up? Oh, burnt sausage is on the barbecue. All right. What else? Anybody else have something they can drop into the chat about roast meats on Sundays, Peter? Excellent. Yep. The hunter archetype, excellent. Your father running the barbecue, your father loved to fish and loved to catch, cook, and eat fish. Yep. Take a couple more. Pork slab on the barbecue, Sarah, thank you. I'm assuming the men of the family, my second husband ate fish only. Wow. Bratwurst frying on a stick over the fire. These are great memories. So I'll share a quick one from my childhood. Oh, meat dripping sandwiches, says Grant. My second husband ate only fish, says Deirdre. So I'll tell you a quick story from my growing up. In my family at Thanksgiving, the oldest, the senior male member of our family was the person that always carved the turkey. That was the tradition. Now the men never cooked or never had anything to do with the preparation of the food, but they carved the turkey, and they even had this special carving set that came out for Thanksgiving to carve the meat. I thought that was very interesting. That sends a lot of interesting messages to the young boys and to the girls in the family about who's important and what their role is and everything. So it's really interesting. So I love some of the things the memes you see online. Real men use charcoal, and then I searched men and meat on Google, and this was the image that came up, one of the first ones. I thought this was hilarious. So here we have your kind of traditionally sort of super male person all pumped up, and they're cooking all this meat on the grill. And this is really part of our culture. And I just find it fascinating on so many different levels. But there's something about this notion of men and meat. And traditionally, again, this is the place where men were able to help with making food. It didn't involve, they weren't making the potato salad, but they were always involved with it's like the place that they were culturally and allowed to experience food. So let's take a look at some statistics here just to remind ourselves of the situation. So, the U.S. ranks highest in meat consumption in the world. In the U.S., we consume about per person about 216 pounds of meat a year. And then men eat the most meat. And so men eat about 57% more meat than women. And as the Vegans Society did a survey and found that 63% of those people who identify as vegans are female and only 37% are male, which is interesting. So clearly it's not just that we have a meat consumption problem, we have a male meat consumption problem in the world in developed nations. So let's take a look at some of these stats here. So heart disease in the United States and I'm sure down under is the number one cause of death, killing about 350,000 males per year. The percent of males age 20 and over with high blood pressure in our country is about 30%. It's probably pretty similar for you. And then more than, close to 60,000 men die each year of a stroke. And 80%, this is really fascinating, of sudden cardiac events in our country where, people have a sudden cardiac event without any warning occur in men. So there's something about men's physiology, perhaps, that is more prone to these sudden heart attacks. And remember, the number one sign, like the number one symptom of having a heart attack is sudden death. So remember that there are a lot of people that die of heart attacks when their widowmaker's clogged and they just, this is the story you hear about someone playing tennis and they just drop dead. And this is what happens. And men are more likely to develop heart disease 10 to 15 years earlier than women and are much more likely to die. But what should we care about meat? Is this actually, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but just take a quick look at some of the studies. Harvard here in the United States has clear evidence of the connection between red meat and substantially premature death. The Mayo Clinic in Minnesota here in the United States, research shows that people who eat red meat have an increased risk of death from heart disease, stroke, and diabetes. And then the EPIC study, which is a famous study in the US, found that processed meat consumption led to roughly a 70% increase of dying from heart disease and about an 11% increased risk of dying of cancer. And lastly, the World Health Organization has come out and said, quote, a diet high in meat, particularly if it's cooked well done, may be associated with an increased risk of developing prostate cancer, which is the second most common cancer in men, the first being lung due to smoking, but the second most common is prostate cancer. And this is because of something called heterocyclic amines. This is a fascinating finding that when you burn meat, that charring that everyone loves, that really, when the meat has that char, is actually triggers the development of these heterocyclic amines, which are carcinogens. So in fact, the grilling piece of the meat puzzle, it makes it worse. So not only are you eating meat, which automatically, first off, is already inflaming your system through the carnitine and the TMAO and the stuff that's in the meat itself, but you're ramping that up by grilling it, which causes more problems. And by the way, when you grill vegetables, it does trigger the development of heterocyclic amines, but a tiny amount compared to what happens in meat. And then, we layer in the COVID piece, of recent history where people with COVID-related complications and death was significantly higher for people with cancer, obesity, heart conditions, and type 2 diabetes. So again, taking a look at just general health issues. And so the essential question we're truly trying to dig into here is, how can we persuade the men in our lives to make better food choices, especially when it comes to the consumption of animal products? So do men require meat? Of course not. Again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but the American Dietetic Association in the United States is kind of our leading group that makes statements about nutrition and public health. And they came out years ago and said that a properly planned plant-based diet is, of course, healthful, nutritionally adequate, and provides health benefits for all stages of life, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, and even for athletes. So our largest body of people who do dietetic research, that's a lot of it publicly funded, is coming out and saying plant-based is absolutely adequate for everyone. So what's the real deal with men and meat? So why don't we jump in the chat box, and I want you to tell me what you think is going on. Like, why are men so connected to meat? What's the deal? So jump in the chat and tell me, what do you think? Why are so many men just obsessed with meat? What's that about? Scott's or Carl's saying it's tradition, makes people feel more macho. Media, it's associated with manhood, ignorance. Yeah, I think that's a big piece. They want to build muscle. My two grandsons are obsessed with meat. It's very ingrained in the culture. Absolutely. We're such routine eaters. If it tastes good, we want more. Yeah, sure. That's where you get into the fat and the all that's in there. It just tastes good. Sure. All right. So yeah, I think you're right on. So let's dive into this. Men are closer to Neanderthals than women. Thanks, Graham. That's good. All right. So some social research that I've dug into really shed some fascinating light on this whole situation, which I think you'll find interesting, is that according to some studies, some social research studies that have been done, vegetarian men are actually perceived up to 30% less masculine than people who follow a more standard diet. And men who eat a lot of beef are perceived as 20% more masculine, according to a Journal of Consumer Research study, and 30% less feminine than vegetarians. And this is a study, the same study that I quoted a moment ago. When male subjects in this study were given a choice of meat or non-meat options, the greatest demand for meat came from people who rated themselves lower in socioeconomic status. So according to the sort of thesis that they were working with in this study was that meat actually was being used as a substitute for status, which is really fascinating. If you really look at what's happening in India and China now, as their middle class is burgeoning and people are moving up out of the lower classes, the lower economic classes, that one of the first things they do is start eating more meat. Now, of course, it's because they have a little more money. So once you have a little more money, but there is a piece of it that actually there's a status piece connected to meat. That the idea that the more your family's more well off if you can eat meat. And of course, when that happens, then that's why we see as countries become more economically stable and more people are being pulled out of poverty. Then we start seeing immediately the rise of prostate cancer, breast cancer, type 2 diabetes, all this stuff. And so fascinating. Here's another study in 2018. Many men are interested in eating less meat, but they have a hard time doing it without social permission. That men who took part in this year-long research that was done found that they experienced a lot of social isolation among groups of men, their friends, after reducing their intake of animal protein. I'm sure many of you have experienced this. I've experienced this as well. When I used to be a teacher, often at lunch at the school where I worked, I would sit down with other teachers, and often there were athletic coaches, like football coaches, would sit down and we'd be eating lunch together. And I got so much grief from these people because I would sit down with my big giant salad and they were all eating, burgers and French fries and all this stuff. And I just got so much grief from them. And that's a whole separate presentation, getting into how to manage the social piece of being a plant-based eater. But really, I think ultimately it was because they were threatened by the fact that I was trying to be healthy and they knew they weren't. Another study, refusal to give up meat consumption seems to be linked to masculinity, traditionalism, hierarchies of all which resemble and maintain conventional structures of power in the Western world. I thought that was an interesting one. And then another study, 2003, found that meat consumption is clearly not the outcome of biological necessity. We don't need it, but is a practice that is deeply embedded within a complex set of social forces that we live in. So this is actually a cultural issue, not obviously a biological issue. You don't need meat to survive. We know this, but people feel like it's something they need to do as a cultural piece. And here, this guy from Edge Hill University in Great Britain, meat remains for many men a stable, if arbitrary, hook on which to hang their gender identity. The more meat you eat, the more manly you are. Then there's this, and I think this is actually really fascinating. These are some ads from the US, but I'm sure you all have similar ads down. But these are from some of the fast food restaurants, the two, one on the left and the one on the right. Burger King, it'll blow your mind away. That's an ad that actually existed, believe it or not. Then on the right there, that's Paris Hilton, a well-known sort of, I don't know what to call her, femme fatale in the United States in the culture. And, she'll tell you size doesn't matter. She's lying. And then in the middle, that's an advertisement for a ham company, a Southern ham. And they're labeling that Lady Edison, the company, and the ham they're selling is the hoofed temptress of North Carolina. So we have this fascinating mixture of sexuality and meat and the selling of meat. And there's been some really interesting research done by some sociologists about this. And again, I don't necessarily agree with this conclusion, but I think it's fascinating to take a look at. So this woman, Adams, wrote this book called The Sexual Politics of Meat. And she claims, in her analysis, she's a sociologist, that meat is a symbol of male dominance, that it actually is connected to male dominance, and that she states it's a process of like objectifying, fragmenting, and the consumption connects women and animals into some sort of male patriarchal culture. Now, again, this is a stretch. We got to sort of expand our minds to really process this, but isn't it interesting? She even argues, and I think this is pretty fascinating, that you can't be a feminist and eat meat, because if you think about it, meat itself is the consumption, and the raising of meat is actually a sexist act, because you're mostly focusing on these female cows and subjecting them and taking their babies away and all that stuff. So she's kind of out there, but and one of her contemporaries writes about the message embedded in the sexualization of meat is that women, like chicken and steak, actually exist to be salivated over and consumed by men. So again, interesting concepts. Not sure, how it resonates with me, but I think it's really interesting to consider. And here's another ad. Carl's Jr. is a burger company in our country, and that's one of the ads that you see. So let's sum it all up before we dive into what to do about it. Vegetarians are generally seen as less masculine. Meat is often considered a substitute for status in some studies. Non-traditional diet choices can lead to feelings of isolation, where peers will give you grief and make you feel alienated if you start making better and healthier choices. It's hard to get social permission by men to eat plant-based. There's lots of such social forces going on, and that meat consumption is actually in some ways tied to gender identity. So let's take a look at what we can do. How can we get men to make better food choices? So here's some wisdom that we can share that we've gained over the years. And again, it applies to everybody who's maybe being a little stubborn about eating better, but really we're looking at and targeting men. So strategy number one is help arm the men in your lives, or yourself if you're a male, with easy, non-threatening replies for your friends. You got to be ready to you don't want to get into a battle with people. When you sit down with your meal and they start going at you, you got to be ready with really passive responses so that people don't turn it into a battle, because ultimately they're just trying to pick a fight with you because they're worried about their own choices. And so we always encourage people to use phrases like, I'm trying eating this way for a few weeks to see how I feel. See how non-threatening that is? I made a bet with my friend to see if I could be a vegetarian for a month. I'm giving it a try. Maybe you say something like, my doctor says it sounds good, so I'm giving it a try. Or maybe my doctor says she wants me to do this for a few weeks to see how it goes. So you can see those are non-threatening. You're not getting on your soapbox and lecturing your friends and trying to turn this into a battle. You're just saying, I'm trying this for a little while, see how it feels. So just, arm the men in your life, or if you're a man and you have to sit down with your peers, just try to be non-threatening. I know that sounds so silly. Like how my wife always says, how fragile is the male ego? What is the problem there? And I said, I know, it's weird, but men don't like to be threatened. So here's another one. Strategy number 2 is leverage the buddy system. I've seen more men try to improve their health through some sort of wager. So if that means who loses the most weight or who's going to run the fastest mile, it's not that women aren't competitive. We know they are, but I think men, for some reason, whether it's genetic or it's cultural, really appreciate a little wager or bet or something. So if they can, you can get a partner in crime, get them to team up with a friend. It creates a little social pressure, creates some community. And like I said, we had actually in the school I worked in years ago, we had two guys that were trying to lose weight on the faculty, and they ended up betting that, one of them could swim faster than the other one and who could lose weight. And it was just hilarious. And they had a lot of fun with it. So don't underestimate the power of having a buddy. Strategy number 3, watch out and try to avoid the word forever. So if you go home or go to a family gathering and say to everybody in your family, we are never eating meat for the rest of our lives, you're going to scare a lot of people, and you're not going to get many people to jump on board. And so maybe start off with the men in your life talking about trying, no meat for a day, a week, or maybe a month, or maybe a few months. Try to be patient, and maybe even go with kind of that 90-10 rule, which is if you're eating 90% plant-based and then maybe 10% animal products, which really, when you do the math, comes out to about 2 meals a week. So if 2 meals a week can have an animal product, but then the rest of them are plant-based, whole food plant-based, then you're going to get a lot of benefits from that, and you'll probably be okay as long as you don't have heart disease or an advanced stage of some sort of lifestyle related disease. You're probably going to be okay and see huge benefits. And of course, the hope is that over time, that person is going to surrender and just say, you know what, I don't even miss the meat anymore, and stop eating it. But be patient and try to watch out for words like forever, because that's a scary thing. I even say to myself, I love cheese, I just don't eat it. I love the taste of it, but I think the idea that maybe down the road in 10 years I might have a piece of cheese pizza, I don't know, maybe. I'm not going to say forever, but no, we'll see. Strategy number 4. You might want to have the erectile dysfunction conversation. Nothing gets the attention of a man than worries about his penis. And there's a doctor in the United States named Aaron Spitz. He literally wrote the book on penises. He wrote a book called The Penis Book. And here's one of his quotes. He says, the most common reason a man may experience a problem with having an erection is a problem with blood flow due to narrowing of the arteries. Whole food plant-based diet and regular exercise can prevent many of these diseases. So Dr. Esselstyn often refers to this as the canary in the trouser, that a lot of times, because the penile artery is so small, when that gets blocked, it's usually a sign of heart disease in other parts of the body. It just so happens that the penile artery is very small, so erectile dysfunction can sometimes be one of the first signs that you have heart disease. And what a great way to leverage the male psyche there. There's nothing a guy worries about probably more psychologically than perhaps not being sexual. So a healthy heart equals healthy sex. And like I said, Dr. Spitz literally wrote the book on the penis book, and he's quite funny if you ever get a chance to see him speak. Strategy number 5, leverage the male need for autonomy. I don't think I know any man that wants to be dependent on others. This is kind of a weird male thing, whether it's cultural or genetic. I don't want to have that conversation, but autonomy tends to be pretty much a big part of men's psyche. They don't like to be a burden on people. They like to kind of, it's that old cowboy kind of image of, the lone cowboy taking care of himself, needs nobody. And no man wants to be sick and weak and have to be taken care of. And so men actually are twice as likely to have a heart attack compared to women. And so really, we know some women who've gone plant-based and their husbands are not interested in doing it. And sometimes if they really get spicy with them, the wives will say, look, I'm not going to take care of you. If you keep driving your health into this pit, I refuse to take care of you. And again, no man wants to be dependent on somebody. And so that's a really good one to leverage, to have a conversation with a loved one where it starts with something like, hey, I'm worried about you, and I want you to have your autonomy as you grow older, and I don't want you to be sick. And that's something to talk to them about as you start to try to convince them. All right, strategy number 6, predictability. When you're trying to change, if things start to get scary and sort of uncontrollable, you're going to freak people out and they're probably going to go back to their old things. Everyone on the planet seems to have this sense of comfort foods. Like, what do you want to go to when you're feeling hangry and maybe you had a day you're feeling a little lonely? You want to warm up with something that is from your childhood often. And so you want to watch out for serving men or anybody who's doubting plant-based eating. You don't want to serve them the scary stuff. You don't want to kick it off with like the quinoa white bean casserole. That's going to scare people. So what we do when we're trying to win over guests, and often the men especially, is we want to make something hearty and make something that looks familiar. So we'll go with the spinach lasagna versus the meat lasagna. We'll make pasta with some sort of healthy pesto. We'll do veggie burgers piled with all the fixins, a black bean burrito, just like we have a restaurant in the United States called Chipotle, where you go to you stand, it's called fast casual. You stand there and order your food and they make it and you walk along the line and it's takeout. So, making all kinds of fixins for a bean burrito, or maybe like a lentil sloppy joe. Sloppy joes or barbecue, and I'm sure you have them there, but stick to the stuff that's predictable. Don't freak them out with the scary stuff. Because a lot of times when people don't understand plant-based nutrition, they think that they're going to only be eating salads and bland food for the rest of their lives. And so you want to show them that that's not the case. And actually you can get very full and feel stuffed on a plant-based diet. Actually, let me go back to that for a second. So when my brother-in-law, Rip Esselstyn, was working with firefighters in Austin, Texas, he's a former firefighter in the United States. He was trying to get his fellow firefighters to adopt a healthier diet. And that's exactly what he did. He called it plant strongifying male food. So it was, it wasn't beef burgers, it was bean burgers. It wasn't fajitas, chicken fajitas, it was veggie fajitas. He just tried to swap out the unhealthy stuff and still serve the same food. Strategy 7, leverage cost savings. If you want to get a male's attention, generally speaking, most males I know are pretty cheap. They like to save money. They don't like to feel like they're being ripped off. And so if you want to get their attention, discuss saving money. I mean, grocery costs, doctor's visits, medication costs, going out to dinner, all that stuff is going to save you money. There's this great myth about how plant-based eating is more expensive than eating meat. That's just not true. We've done the research. We've crunched the numbers. In some cases, there's a study that was done by the Kantar group, which is an advertising and marketing group in the United States. And they found that you can save up to 40% on your grocery bill going plant-based. Maybe keep track of your monthly savings, create a reward fund. We had a good family friend go plant-based, and she found that she saved something like $20,000 a year on her food costs, which I was just amazed by. And then, like I said, plant-based diets have been shown to be like 40% cheaper. All right, role models. If you've ever seen the movie Game Changers, I'm sure many of you have. My brother-in-law was one of the producers on that movie, and Dr. Esselstyn's in that movie. They show some really amazing athletes in that movie. The guy on the left, Nimel Delgado, has never eaten any meat in his life. He was raised by these hippie parents that never fed him any meat. He's huge. I can't remember the guy in the middle's name, but then the guy on the right, Patrick Baboumian, who still holds a world record, I think, in whatever this event is. It's like the sled pull or something, not pull, but like carry, where and he's totally plant-based and is a big animal rights guy. And so these are incredibly powerful, strong people, and they've done it all on plants. Strategy 9, there's a concept called choice architecture, which I believe we might be doing this presentation later with you all, but it's a behavioral economics strategy that talks about setting people's environments up for success. And so it refers to this notion of influencing people's choices by organizing their environment and the context in which they make decisions. And it suggests that individual behavior can be influenced by little suggestions and context and environment and positive reinforcements. And what that means really in a nutshell is that set your home up for success. So for instance, if you get the unhealthy food out of the house and then make sure you have chopped up fruit in a Tupperware container in your refrigerator at eye level, the men in your life will eat that food if it's there and it's easy to get to. If you buy a watermelon or a honeydew melon and put it on your kitchen table, they're not going to eat it because it's just too hard to chop up. It's men, not just men, but human beings tend to be lazy, and they're what we call energy conservators. And so they want to conserve energy. They're lazy. They're hungry at the end of the day. And if you make it super easy for them to make the right choice, they will. Having baby potatoes already cooked and in the refrigerator, so you can just dip them in some walnut sauce and pop them in your mouth when you're hungry, instead of going for the cheap salty chips or something like that. Just set people up. And choice, environment is everything. It makes a huge difference. Have them ready to go, make the easy choice the right choice. Strategy 10, just like with raising children, I don't want to say that men are acting like children, but maybe they are a little bit. You want to catch them doing the right thing. So when they're making healthier choices, positive reinforcement goes way further than negative reinforcement. If you're just nagging and complaining and bitching at them, they're not going to listen. Saying things like, I noticed you've been eating oatmeal for breakfast every day. Well done. If you, wow, you've been devouring the salads I've been making, all these nice positive things. Thanks so much for going along with Meatless Mondays that I'm trying to do in the house, is a great way to get people feeling good about it versus you always eat that junky food. That never works. What was not part of my bio in the beginning, and I need to update my bio, and Peter gave such a beautiful bio for me, is I went back to school and got my master's degree in social work. So I'm currently working with addicts in the addiction and recovery world. And a lot of this carries over to people trying to stop using alcohol and drugs. It's very similar. Is setting up their environment, catching them doing the right thing, reinforcing positive, all the stuff that helps people make better choices. So my final thoughts are this, and then we can dive into questions, is knowledge alone does not drive behavior. As much as we think that by just telling someone the facts that they're going to listen, behavior change involves a lot of other things. It certainly involves, again, like, there's hundreds and thousands of books written about how to change, how to make better choices. And just know that by just telling someone the information, they've got to really want to change. And of course, you've got to set up the environment. A good friend of ours, Adam Sudd, in the plant-based world, has a great quote. He says, make your environment look like your goals. I love that quote. So make your home look like the goals that you want to achieve. And it makes it so much easier. Remember, there are a lot of outside forces working against men, including social acceptance. Just recognize that does exist. Much as we want to think we're stronger than all the social forces that are around us, we all want to have friends. And if you feel like you're getting kicked to the curb by your friends, it doesn't feel very good. And men need friends just like women. And so just be empathetic with the men in your life and know that there is pressure to be more manly, whatever you want to say. And just remember choice architecture. The two researchers, Thaler and Sunstein in the United States, wrote a book called Nudge. It's how to help people make better choices. Environment does play a huge choice. And then last but not least, I always want to review this and remind people that really knowing your why is such a huge piece of behavior change and changing who you are. It's knowing that big reason that you're doing what you're doing. So knowing your why is knowing your deep purpose, your cause, or the belief that drives and motivates you. It helps you escape the trap of what you think you want now, which might be that greasy burger, versus what you want most, which is to live a long, healthy, disease-free life. And so maybe think about that. Are you doing it for yourself so you don't burden your children? Do you want to live a long, healthy life? Maybe you're sick and tired of being sick and tired. Maybe you hate all the lies of the food industry. Maybe you're doing it for your grandchildren. Maybe you're doing it for the planet. Maybe you love animals. Maybe you're doing it for God or your country or whatever you're doing. Or maybe you just want to be your best self. It's always good to have that slogan in your head of so that when you are tempted, you can say, you know what, I'm more interested in running around with my grandchildren when I'm 80 versus being attached to all these machines and taking handfuls of pills. Now, I want to end on this. I'm not sure if any of you have seen this video, so I'm going to jump out of the presentation and I'm going to pull up a YouTube video. It's only 1 minute long, but I think it's incredibly powerful, especially for men.
What will your last 10 years look like? Will you be quick enough for a game of tag with your grandchild? Strong enough to embrace every moment? Will you grow old with vitality? Or get old with disease? It's time to decide. The average Canadian will spend their last 10 years in sickness. Change your future at makehealthlast.ca.
All right, that is my presentation. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you so much for your attention. And it can be about anything.
Yeah, can I ask you a question? Can you hear me?
Sure, I can. Absolutely.
Cool. I was just wondering, I'm working with clients with all sorts of diseases through the Food for Life program. And what I noticed through, it's only 2 years I've done it, that what people struggle, even if they come to 1, 2, whole curriculums of classes, they don't seem to be able to do it on their own. Once they go back home, they struggle because they're not, for example, I have this mother, she has type 2 diabetes. She knows everything. She's not the knowledge that is missing. It's that the translation into doing it. And I can't be there for her in her home, every day. So I did tell her, try to sit down and find out the why. Why do you actually want to do this? But even that, the food is so addictive and so hard. Is there anything else I can do from my side to support people other than living with them?
So the Esselstyn Foundation actually has a presentation called START, and it's an acronym for like the steps that you can take when you first get started. And so I'm happy to send that to Peter and he can share it out if you want the PowerPoint. But the thing that it goes the same actually with people that I work with in the addiction and recovery world sometimes, which is it's sometimes so overwhelming to make all these changes that you have to kind of really get down to these micro changes. Yeah. And so one of our first things is we always say, for the first week you do this, I don't care what you eat for lunch and dinner, you're just going to eat oats for breakfast. You got to get it so simple that there's no choice. Because as soon as anybody wakes up and says, what am I having for breakfast? It's like, you're done. You're done. Yeah. There shouldn't be any choice. Yeah. You're going to eat oatmeal for breakfast with fruit, maybe a little bit of maple syrup, as much fruit as you want, fresh or frozen, and you're going to have that every day for breakfast. And then let's talk the following week and see how that went. Because one of the great misunderstandings about change, people often think they need to get motivated to then change. But what I like is to flop that and say, tiny little actions build confidence and start to build motivation. Because the great example that I use is push-ups. There's a book that I read called Atomic Habits. I'm sure many of you have seen it. James Clear, he talks about how he wanted to be able to do 100 push-ups, and he could only do a few. And so what he did was every time he had to pee, he did one push-up.
I do that whenever I go to the photocopy machine at work. I do not push-ups, but knee bends, going up and down. People think I'm nuts.
Because then the following week, well, you're like, I could do 2. And then it just starts to build the motivation because of the initial action. So people often think, oh, I've got to wake up one day and be like, now I'm taking control of my life. So I would just say, try to break it down. And in the therapy world, we call it partialization. You got to break down all the big complex stuff into tiny, tiny little steps. We talk a lot about self-care, and that's start with oats. Our acronym goes on to talk about things like our next one is taste the rainbow. Just add as many fruits and vegetables as you can to what you're already eating. Our A is to add legumes. So just again, like each week we're trying a new thing. Try to eat more legumes. And then the R is rely on water. So get your sweetened beverages out of there. Just drink water. The first T is trade out oil, and then the last T, we put 2 T's on the end of it, and we say trade out meat. So again, like that's over a span of numerous weeks. So that's a thought.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah.
We've got a question there in the questions, Brian, from Grant. It's who cholesterol isn't considered important anymore. How important is it to keep it low?
Yeah, I think this is one of those things where there are some studies that are coming out that it's not cholesterol that's evil. However, even you might even say, like, we're still young in this world of being a lipidologist, and there are actual people out there called lipidologists. And what we still know is that high cholesterol is highly correlated with cardiovascular disease, stroke, all this stuff. So it's not that we should say cholesterol is evil, but Grant's right, is that there is some research being done, and they're trying to figure out actually what it is. But for now, we know that high cholesterol, and especially high LDL, is associated with cardiovascular disease, stroke, other problems. So that's kind of the best measurement we have. You can get a calcium test, and this is kind of into the realm. I'm not a doctor, but Dr. Esselstyn talks all about LP small a and what you can do, and getting an angiogram or things like that, or a calcium score. You want to get as many assessments as you can to sort of so you get a full picture of if you might have heart disease or not. But for now, we just know that cholesterol is kind of the tool that we use. But again, as Dr. Esselstyn always reminds us, people's cholesterol differs genetically. So for instance, we have some people who go plant-based and their cholesterol drops to 100 or even into double digits, which is amazing, overall cholesterol. But then we have some people who are strict plant-based eaters and their cholesterol sits at 180. So it's really interesting. So Dr. Esselstyn used to say 150 or below, you got to have it at 150 or below to be heart attack proof. But now he's kind of adjusted that because the more research that comes out is that genetically there are differences. And so for him, he just wants people, he says, if you're eating pure and you're getting these other tests like the calcium score and all that stuff, that's going to give you a better sense of if you're healthy or not, if that makes sense. But that would be a good question for Dr. Esselstyn.
Okay, Brian, there's something I'd like to just bring up before we sort of close things off. One of the programs that I'm involved with, a 12-step program, things can become very addled when somebody's trying to change things. One of the things that we say is that you need to change the way you act before you change the way you think. It kind of applies, I think, to the plant-based world, because we do get loaded, don't we, with so much information. And that's why I think I really like the health aspect and the idea that we need to watch through the years as we grow older, just what we're doing to ourselves is something I think you've made very, very clear in this presentation, and I thank you for that.
Yeah, and I'm fascinated by the whole concept of human nature. And one thing that, whether it's biological or genetic or cultural, but we tend to be not very good at thinking long term. We tend to be very good about thinking short term. Whether you're talking about a drug addict who's just caught in the pleasure cycle, the pleasure trap of just use, feel temporary relief, and then feel like crap, and then go back to using. You could say the same about food. We know what's good for us. We know there's not a diet on the planet that doesn't say eat more fruits and vegetables, yet over and over and over again, we get caught in that little pleasure loop. And I think you're right. We're not very good at, I mean, in the United States, there's a fascinating statistic that I just read is that only about 40% of Americans have saved for retirement. And that's a perfect example of how we tend to be bad about thinking about projecting way into the future. But we're really good at looking at kind of short-term goals, and whether that's just a biological leftover from trying to live day to day as early humans. But I think health is another one. I always say, like, if there was a transparent window on the front of our body and we could see what we were doing to our body by not taking care of it, I think we'd be much better. But I think most Americans are walking around, most Kiwis too, I'm sure, that are saying to themselves, I eat pretty healthy. I'm pretty healthy. I have so many friends that tell me that I'm pretty healthy. I take the skin off the chicken. I eat a salad with ranch dressing for dinner, and I only have dessert 3 nights a week. I mean, that's what people think, and they think that's healthy. And I think that you make a great point. We're not very good at taking care of ourselves over time. And it does, ultimately, we're all the sum total of our life's decisions. And I think every time you eat a meal, you have a chance to sort of do something positive for your body and the world. And it adds up. It adds up.
That's fantastic, Brian. What I might do is just revert to my co-host Catherine here and see if there's any more questions that she wants to raise.
Yeah, I think most of them are just comments. I'm scanning the chat, so I think we covered the questions, I think.
We just had one question from Alistair about questions about LDL. Have we got a little bit more time just to, Alistair, did you want to talk about that one, or?
Sure, we can, absolutely. I'll try to answer as best I can. Again, I'm not a practitioner, but I've heard Dr. Esselstyn answer almost every question, so I can at least parrot him.
Okay, I have a personal comment here. I've been a croner for several decades and plant-based. And the last 6 months, I was almost totally oil-less. However, my LDL still was 150 or something. So reluctantly, I've tried everything for several years to bring my cholesterols down, and to no avail. So reluctantly, I'm now on the minimal statin because my doctor and I have argued fruitfully that LDL is highly related to cardiovascular events. And but I was adamant that I would be natural, no drug kind of thing. So despite what I could do, my genetics, my liver just keeps making this LDL. No matter how much oats and barley I eat and leafy veggies and fiber, I'm still high LDL. My triglycerides are almost zero, so I'm doing all the good things. So I have reluctantly changed my mindset. I'm a man, and have agreed to try and minimize my risk for cardiovascular events by trying to lower my LDL. And that's just been going for a couple of weeks, and obviously we'll take some blood tests in a few months and see how we're going. So the genetics is not an excuse, it's just another source of LDL. So it still needs to be taken into account to, as we have been told by many, that LDLs are lethal.
Yeah, so you raise a great point again about, that some people just, again, you won or either won or lost the genetic lottery, is that your body tends to make more cholesterol than other people. And so, Dr. Esselstyn has many patients whose cardiologists continue to encourage them to take small little amounts of statins, because from a medical standpoint, and especially if this doctor's not super open to plant-based nutrition, they just worry about getting sued. So they want to be able to say, oh, my patient is still taking a little bit of a statin. But what we suggest, if you are interested, is I don't know how much you're taking, and I don't really know amounts, but what we often talk about with our clients or patients is, if you really want to, you want to get it down to as little as possible, see how you react to the drug. And then maybe after 6 months, if you're kind of in a good range, maybe you say to the doctor, you know what, I'd like to try for 2 months to cut it in half and see how it goes. And so you're going to have to drive that conversation of reducing it. But if it's just a tiny little amount, I mean, again, that's really common for a lot of Dr. Esselstyn's patients, is because their cardiologist, he doesn't ever want to get into a battle with a cardiologist. So he says, if your cardiologist, wants you on a tiny little bit just for insurance sake, like, all right, that's, you got to do it. As long as you can handle the side effects, because a lot of people have a lot of negative side effects. If your body can tolerate it, it's okay.
Thank you.
Brian, thank you very much for the evening, and we look forward to the next discussion, and it's much appreciated.